Behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, where every smile is practiced and every gesture calculated, a single moment of truth can shatter years of carefully constructed royal protocol. What happens when a young prince's innocent action reveals a family secret so shocking that even the most experienced palace guards lose their composure? This is the untold story of how one afternoon at a charity event transformed from a routine royal appearance into a crisis that would test the very foundations of the monarchy. It's a tale of hidden struggles, fierce protection, and the lengths to which those closest to the royal family will go to shield them from a world that watches their every move. Sometimes the most profound revelations come from the most unexpected sources, and sometimes a child's honesty is the most dangerous truth of all. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Clarence House as Lady Sarah Mitchell, Camilla's personal assistant, adjusted her navy blazer for the third time in 10 minutes. 23 years of working in royal circles had taught her that perfection wasn't just expected, it was demanded. Every detail of today's charity event for the Children's Trust had been planned months in advance, from the precise timing of arrivals to the carefully selected guest list of donors and supporters. Sarah glanced at her gold watch, a gift from Camilla after her first decade of service. 3:15 exactly. The Queen Consort would emerge from the residence in precisely 10 minutes, followed by the Prince and Princess of Wales with their children. Today's event was particularly significant because it marked the first time in months that the entire family would appear together publicly since the recent health concerns that had kept several senior royals out of the spotlight. The charity garden party was being held in the grounds behind Clarence House, where white marquees dotted the landscape like elegant mushrooms after rain. Inside the main tent, representatives from various children's charities waited with presentations and displays, hoping to catch the attention of their royal patrons. The afternoon was meant to be a celebration of the monarchy's commitment to child welfare, with photo opportunities carefully orchestrated to show the younger generation of royals engaging with important causes. Marcus Thompson, the senior protection officer assigned to the family, stood near the French doors leading from the house to the garden. At 45, he had served the royal household for nearly 2 decades, his sharp eyes constantly scanning for potential threats. His earpiece crackled softly with updates from other security personnel positioned throughout the grounds. Everything appeared normal, yet something in his experienced gut suggested he should remain extra vigilant today. Inside the house, Princess Catherine was having a quiet word with 9-year-old Prince George, while his younger siblings, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis, waited impatiently by the door. The conversation seemed serious, with Catherine kneeling to George's eye level, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. Whatever they were discussing, it appeared to be causing the young prince some distress, his usually confident demeanor replaced by an unusual fidgeting nervousness. The preparation for royal events always involved extensive briefings for the children about expected behavior, appropriate responses to questions from guests, and the importance of maintaining the family's public image. Today's briefing had been more thorough than usual, given the sensitive nature of some of the charities they would be meeting with, organizations dealing with children who had experienced trauma, illness, and family difficulties. Camilla emerged from her private study, where she had been reviewing notes about each charity representative she would meet. Her cream-colored dress was elegant but approachable, chosen specifically to put the children at ease while maintaining the dignity expected of her position. Her pearl earrings caught the light as she moved, and her smile, practiced through years of public appearances, was warm but measured. Sarah fell into step beside her as they approached the garden doors. She carried a small leather folder containing the afternoon schedule, backup conversation topics, and discreet notes about each guest's background and current projects. The folder also contained emergency contact information and protocol instructions for various scenarios that might arise during the event. Prince William joined them in the hallway, his military bearing evident even in civilian clothes. He nodded to Marcus, acknowledging the security arrangements with a brief exchange that spoke volumes about their long working relationship. The prince had always been particularly conscious of security matters, perhaps more so since becoming a father himself. As the family gathered near the entrance, the children's excitement was palpable despite their formal training. Princess Charlotte whispered something to Prince Louis that made him giggle, earning a gentle reminder about indoor voices from their father. Prince George, however, remained unusually quiet, his hands clasped behind his back in a way that suggested he was concentrating hard on something important. The first guests were already arriving, their cars pulling through the security checkpoint at the main gate. The guest list included major donors to children's charities, representatives from organizations receiving royal patronage, and select members of the media who had been granted access to document the family's charitable work. Each guest had been thoroughly vetted, their backgrounds checked, and their reasons for attending verified. Lady Mitchell reviewed the final details with the household staff. The kitchen had prepared afternoon tea with careful attention to various dietary restrictions among the guests. The flowers throughout the marquees had been chosen specifically to avoid allergens that might affect the children who would be present. Even the music playing softly in the background had been selected for its calming, appropriate nature. The timing of the event was crucial. The family would spend exactly 90 minutes meeting with charity representatives, touring the displays, and participating in light activities with some of the children who benefited from the organization's work. Every moment was scheduled, every interaction planned to maximize the positive impact while maintaining the careful balance between accessibility and security. Marcus received confirmation through his earpiece that all security sweeps had been completed and that the guest list had been verified one final time. The sniffer dogs had cleared the area, and plainclothes officers were positioned throughout the crowd. Everything was proceeding according to protocol, yet he found himself paying particular attention to Prince George, whose behavior seemed different from his usual confident public persona. The royal children had been attending public events since they were very young, carefully introduced to their future roles through controlled exposure to royal duties. Today's event was considered relatively low-key, focusing on charitable work rather than state functions or formal ceremonies. However, the presence of representatives from children's mental health organizations added a layer of complexity to the interactions. Sarah noticed that several of the charity workers seemed particularly eager to speak with the children, hoping that young royal involvement might help bring attention to their causes. The requests for photos and brief conversations had been carefully managed, with strict time limits and approved topics of discussion. Nothing was left to chance in the carefully choreographed afternoon. As the moment approached for the family to step outside and begin their official duties, there was a sense of anticipation that seemed to carry an unusual weight. The staff members exchanged glances that suggested they too sensed something different about today's event, though none could pinpoint exactly what felt different about this otherwise routine royal engagement. The afternoon that was meant to celebrate the monarchy's commitment to children would soon take a turn that no amount of planning could have anticipated. In the careful world of royal protocol, where every word was weighed and every action considered for its potential impact, spontaneity was the enemy, and spontaneity was exactly what was about to arrive in the most unexpected form possible. The French doors opened with ceremonial precision as the royal family stepped into the afternoon sunshine. The assembled guests, who had been chatting quietly among themselves while sampling delicate sandwiches and pastries, immediately straightened and began forming the reception lines that had been rehearsed during the morning briefing. Cameras clicked discreetly as photographers captured the family's arrival, their lenses trained on the carefully composed group. Prince George walked slightly behind his parents, his usual stride replaced by an almost tentative gait that only those who knew him well would notice. His younger siblings seemed unaware of his change in demeanor, with Charlotte already waving to some of the children from the charities who had been positioned near the entrance to the main marquee. Sarah moved smoothly to her position near Camilla, ready to facilitate introductions and provide subtle reminders about names and organizational details when needed. Her leather folder remained discreetly at her side, though she had memorized most of the crucial information during her preparation that morning. The afternoon was proceeding exactly as planned, with the warm autumn weather providing a perfect backdrop for the outdoor event. The first stop was a display from the Rainbow Trust, an organization supporting families with seriously ill children. The representative, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Jennifer Walsh, had prepared a presentation about their recent initiatives to expand mental health support for siblings of sick children. Her display featured artwork created by children in their programs, bright watercolors depicting hope and resilience in the face of difficult circumstances. As Camilla engaged with Dr. Walsh about the organization's funding needs, Prince William and Catherine moved toward a nearby table where representatives from Place 2B, a mental health charity focused on school-based counseling, were waiting with several young beneficiaries of their programs. The children, aged between 8 and 12, had been carefully prepared for this meeting, though their nervous excitement was evident in their fidgeting hands and wide eyes. Prince George found himself standing next to a girl named Emma, who was 10 years old and had been receiving support from Place 2B following her parents' difficult divorce. Emma's counselor had suggested that meeting other children who understood challenging family situations might help her feel less isolated in her experiences. The organizers thought that meeting the young prince might provide a positive, uplifting moment for her recovery journey. What the organizers hadn't anticipated was that Prince George might recognize something familiar in Emma's quiet demeanor and careful way of speaking. His parents had spent considerable time in recent months helping him understand and cope with some difficult situations within his own extended family, including health concerns and personal struggles that had been kept private from the public eye. Marcus Thompson positioned himself where he could observe all the interactions while maintaining a respectful distance. His trained eye caught every gesture, every approach by guests, and every movement of his charges. He noticed that Prince George seemed to be having a more intense conversation with the young girl than the light, encouraging exchanges typically expected at such events. The conversation between George and Emma began simply enough with the usual questions about school and hobbies. However, as they talked, Emma mentioned how her counselor had been helping her understand that sometimes adults and families have problems that aren't anyone's fault, and that it was okay to feel confused or upset about things happening at home. George's response surprised everyone within earshot. Instead of offering the kind of general encouragement that had been suggested during his briefing, he began sharing his own experiences with family difficulties. His voice, though still quiet, carried the earnest honesty that only children possess when they finally find someone who might understand their situation. Lady Mitchell noticed the shift in the conversation's tone and moved slightly closer, her instincts telling her that this interaction was moving beyond the carefully planned parameters of the event. She caught fragments of George's words as he described feeling worried about family members and not always understanding why adults were sad or angry. The young prince's candid revelations about his own family's private struggles began to paint a picture that differed dramatically from the carefully maintained public image of royal unity and stability. He spoke about conversations he had overheard, about times when his step-grandmother Camilla had seemed upset, and about his confusion regarding family tensions that adults thought they had hidden from the children. Dr. Walsh, who was still speaking with Camilla about her organization's work, became aware that something unusual was happening nearby. Her professional training in child psychology allowed her to recognize the signs of a child processing difficult emotions through conversation with a peer. However, the implications of what she was witnessing went far beyond a typical therapeutic moment. Other guests began to notice the intense nature of the conversation between the two children. Several charity representatives found themselves straining to hear the details of what was being shared, realizing that they might be witnessing revelations about the royal family that had never been made public. The knowledge created an uncomfortable tension among the adults who understood both the significance of what they were hearing and their ethical obligation to respect the privacy of a child working through family difficulties. Prince William, engaged in conversation with another charity representative about funding for counseling programs, remained unaware of the direction his son's conversation had taken. Catherine, who was examining artwork created by children in therapy programs, was positioned with her back to George and Emma, missing the early warning signs that might have prompted parental intervention. Sarah Mitchell's years of experience managing delicate royal situations kicked into high alert as she realized the potential implications of George's openness. Her mind raced through possible damage control strategies while she maintained her composed exterior. The situation required immediate but subtle intervention to prevent any lasting consequences from the child's honest but potentially damaging revelations. The afternoon that had been designed to showcase the royal family's commitment to children's welfare was transforming into a scenario where a royal child himself was the one in need of protection. The carefully controlled environment that the palace staff had created was proving insufficient to contain the unpredictable nature of genuine human emotion and childhood honesty. Marcus Thompson's security training had prepared him for many potential threats, but the challenge of protecting the royal family from unintended self-revelation by one of their own children required a different kind of strategic thinking. His hand moved almost imperceptibly toward his communication device as he considered whether the situation warranted immediate intervention or continued careful observation. The guests, charity workers, and media representatives present found themselves in an unprecedented situation. They were witnessing a moment of genuine vulnerability from a future king, a child sharing his real experiences rather than the carefully scripted interactions typically associated with royal public appearances. The weight of this responsibility created a palpable tension throughout the gathering, as Prince George continued his conversation with Emma, sharing details about family conflicts and personal struggles that had never been intended for public consumption. The afternoon was rapidly approaching a point where intervention would become necessary to protect both the monarchy's privacy and the emotional well-being of a child who was simply seeking understanding and connection with someone who might share his experiences. The conversation between Prince George and Emma had now attracted the attention of several nearby charity workers who found themselves in the uncomfortable position of overhearing increasingly personal details about the royal family's private struggles. Emma, encouraged by finding someone who seemed to understand her situation, had begun sharing her own experiences with family conflict, which in turn prompted George to reveal even more about his own family's difficulties. George's voice carried clearly in the outdoor setting as he described incidents that painted a troubling picture of tensions within the royal household. He spoke about times when he had heard raised voices between family members, about seeing Camilla looking upset after phone conversations, and about the confusion he felt when adults assured him everything was fine while their behavior suggested otherwise. Sarah Mitchell's training in crisis management was being put to its ultimate test. She needed to intervene without causing a scene that would attract even more attention to the situation. Moving with the practiced grace of someone who had spent decades managing delicate royal situations, she began to navigate through the small crowd toward the two children, her smile never wavering despite her internal alarm. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the Rainbow Trust representative, found herself caught between her professional ethics and her duty as a guest at a royal event. As a trained psychologist, she recognized that both children were engaged in a therapeutic moment of mutual understanding and support. However, she also understood the potential ramifications of the royal child's revelations for both the monarchy and the family's personal well-being. The situation became more complex when George, in his innocent attempt to help Emma understand that family problems were normal, began describing specific incidents involving Camilla and other family members. His descriptions included details about arguments he had witnessed, changes in behavior he had noticed, and his own emotional responses to the family tensions that surrounded him. Marcus Thompson made the decision to move closer to the conversation while maintaining the appearance of routine security monitoring. His earpiece crackled with quiet communications from other security personnel who had also noticed the unusual intensity of the interaction. The protection team was now faced with the challenge of managing a threat that came not from external sources, but from the unguarded honesty of one of their own charges. The guests at the charity event were experiencing varying degrees of discomfort as they realized they were witnessing something far more significant than a typical royal appearance. Several began moving away from the immediate area, instinctively understanding that they were hearing things not meant for public consumption. Others, however, remained transfixed by the rare glimpse into the real lives of the royal family. Prince William, finally noticing the cluster of adults around his son, excused himself from his conversation about funding initiatives and began moving toward the group. His parental instincts were activated before his understanding of the specific situation became clear. But his movement toward George was noticed by others and added to the growing sense that something significant was happening. Catherine, who had been admiring therapeutic artwork with genuine interest and asking detailed questions about the children's healing processes, became aware of a shift in the atmosphere around her. The easy chatter of the garden party had been replaced by a more focused, almost electric tension that seemed centered around her eldest son. George, completely absorbed in his conversation with Emma, remained unaware of the adult drama unfolding around him. He had found someone who understood family difficulties, and the relief of being able to share his experiences honestly was evident in his increasingly animated gestures and confident voice. For the first time in months, he felt like someone truly understood what he was going through. Emma, too, was benefiting from the conversation, finding comfort in learning that even children in families that seemed perfect from the outside could experience confusion and worry about adult problems. Her counselor had always told her that she wasn't alone in her experiences, but hearing similar feelings from someone whose life appeared to be so different from hers was providing a unique form of validation. The charity representatives found themselves facing an ethical dilemma of enormous proportions. The children's conversation was clearly beneficial for both participants, representing exactly the kind of peer support that their organizations advocated. However, the content of the conversation had implications that extended far beyond individual therapeutic benefit into matters of national and institutional significance. Several guests had begun discreetly recording portions of the interaction on their phones, recognizing the historical significance of witnessing unguarded revelations from a future king. The potential value of such recordings, both journalistic and financial, created additional pressure on an already volatile situation. Lady Mitchell finally reached the edge of the conversation area where she could hear George describing a particular incident involving what he called the big argument about grandmother's things, and how it had made Camilla cry for days afterward. The specificity of his revelations was increasing rather than decreasing as he became more comfortable with Emma and more confident that he had found someone who would understand his family's complexities. The mention of specific family conflicts that had clearly been meant to remain private created a moment of crisis for everyone present. Sarah realized that immediate intervention was necessary regardless of the potential disruption it might cause to the event or the therapeutic value of the children's conversation. Marcus Thompson, monitoring the situation through his earpiece communications with other security personnel, received confirmation that several guests were indeed recording the interaction. The protection team now faced the challenge of managing not just the immediate situation but also the potential long-term consequences of George's revelations being captured and potentially shared publicly. Dr. Walsh, drawing on her professional training, attempted to gently redirect the conversation toward more general topics about coping with family changes. However, George, having finally found an outlet for his feelings, was resistant to changing the subject and continued to share increasingly personal details about his family's private struggles. The afternoon that had begun as a celebration of royal charitable work was rapidly becoming a crisis management situation that would test every aspect of the palace's carefully developed protocols for protecting the family's privacy and dignity. The challenge was complicated by the fact that the threat to their privacy was coming from within the family itself, from a child's honest attempt to connect with another young person experiencing similar difficulties. As Sarah prepared to intervene directly in the conversation, and as Marcus coordinated with his team to manage the growing crowd of interested observers, the situation was approaching a critical point where action could no longer be delayed without risking consequences that could extend far beyond the boundaries of a single charity event. The moment of crisis arrived when Prince George, in his earnest attempt to help Emma understand that family problems were universal, began describing what he called the secret meetings that had been happening at various royal residences. His innocent revelations painted a picture of family members gathering to discuss serious matters while deliberately excluding the children, creating an atmosphere of tension and whispered conversations that had clearly affected him deeply. Sarah Mitchell knew she had run out of time for subtle intervention. Moving with practiced efficiency, she approached the two children with her warmest smile, carrying a small tray of specially prepared treats that had been intended for later in the event. Her voice carried the perfect blend of authority and kindness as she addressed both children directly. However, just as Sarah reached the conversation area, George made a statement that caused an immediate stir among all the adults within hearing range. He told Emma that sometimes he heard Camilla talking on the phone about having to pretend everything was okay when she was really worried about someone in the family who was very sick, but that the family couldn't let anyone know because it would cause too much trouble. The reaction was immediate and electric. Several charity representatives exchanged shocked glances, recognizing the potential implications of what they had just heard. The suggestion that someone in the royal family was dealing with a serious illness that was being kept secret from the public carried enormous significance for both the monarchy and the nation. Marcus Thompson's hand moved to his earpiece as he made the decision that immediate intervention was necessary, regardless of the disruption it would cause to the event or the attention it would draw to the situation. His years of experience had taught him that sometimes the most protective action required accepting short-term embarrassment to prevent long-term damage. As Sarah attempted to engage both children in conversation about the treats she had brought, Prince William arrived at the scene, his parental instincts now fully activated by the obvious tension among the adults surrounding his son. His presence added another layer of complexity to the situation, as his natural desire to understand what was happening with George conflicted with the need for immediate damage control. George, still focused on his conversation with Emma, continued speaking even as the adults around him became increasingly agitated. He described his confusion about why family members would disappear for days at a time without explanation, and why there were so many serious phone calls that stopped when children entered the room. His descriptions were painting a picture of a family dealing with significant private challenges while maintaining their public responsibilities. The charity event guests found themselves witnessing what appeared to be genuine revelations about the inner workings of the royal family during what seemed to be a period of crisis or significant challenge. The contrast between the carefully maintained public image of royal stability and the reality of family struggles that George was describing created a profound sense of cognitive dissonance among the observers. Dr. Walsh, recognizing both the therapeutic value of the conversation for both children and the potentially devastating consequences for the royal family, attempted to create a natural break in the dialogue by introducing a structured activity that might redirect their focus. However, her intervention came too late to prevent the most damaging revelation of all. Prince George, encouraged by Emma's understanding responses and her sharing of similar experiences with family secrets, revealed what he described as the reason everyone has been so worried lately. He told Emma that he had overheard conversations about someone in the family having the bad sickness and that this was why there had been so many changes in their schedules and so many serious conversations among the adults. The impact of this revelation was immediate and profound. Several guests began moving away from the conversation area, instinctively understanding that they had heard information with potentially enormous implications for the monarchy and the nation. Others remained frozen in place, uncertain whether they should pretend they hadn't heard or whether they had some responsibility to act on what they had learned. Sarah Mitchell made the decision that direct intervention was now unavoidable. Moving smoothly but purposefully, she positioned herself between the two children and the growing crowd of observers, while simultaneously signaling to Marcus Thompson that immediate assistance was needed. Her years of experience in managing royal crises had taught her that sometimes the most effective damage control required acknowledging the situation directly rather than attempting to pretend it hadn't occurred. The complexity of the situation was compounded by the fact that both children were clearly benefiting from their conversation, finding comfort and understanding in sharing experiences that they had previously felt isolated by. The therapeutic value of their interaction was evident to all the mental health professionals present, yet the content of their conversation had implications that extended far beyond individual healing into matters of institutional and national significance. Marcus Thompson, coordinating through his earpiece with other members of the security team, implemented what the protection service called a soft extraction protocol. This involved creating a natural-seeming reason for the royal family to move to a different area of the event while ensuring that the most sensitive conversations were discontinued without creating the appearance of crisis or emergency. Prince William, now close enough to hear fragments of his son's conversation, experienced the complex emotions of a parent who suddenly understood that his child had been carrying burdens that the adults had believed they had successfully hidden. The realization that George had been aware of and affected by family tensions added a personal dimension to the crisis that went beyond considerations of public relations or institutional protection. Catherine, alerted by the change in atmosphere around her family, joined the group surrounding George and Emma just in time to hear her son describing his worries about family members and his confusion about the many serious conversations that had been taking place around him in recent months. Her maternal instincts clashed with her role as a senior royal as she struggled to balance George's emotional needs with the necessity of protecting family privacy. The charity representatives found themselves in an unprecedented situation, witnessing revelations that could potentially affect their own organization's relationships with their royal patrons, while also observing two children engaged in what appeared to be a genuinely beneficial therapeutic exchange. The ethical complexities of the situation created a paralysis of response among many of the adults present. As the situation reached its peak intensity, with George continuing to share increasingly specific details about family concerns while the adults around him struggled to find an appropriate response, it became clear that the carefully planned charity event had become something entirely different, a moment of crisis that would test every aspect of the royal family's ability to manage private challenges while maintaining their public responsibilities and protecting the emotional well-being of their children. The crisis reached its peak when Prince George, now completely absorbed in his conversation with Emma and feeling understood for the first time in months, began describing specific details about what he had overheard regarding a family member's medical condition. His innocent attempt to help another child understand that families everywhere face difficult challenges was about to reveal information that could have far-reaching consequences for the monarchy and the nation. As George spoke about the doctors coming to the house and why everyone has been so scared, Lady Sarah Mitchell realized that gentle intervention was no longer sufficient. The young prince was on the verge of revealing details about a health crisis within the royal family that had been carefully kept private to prevent public panic and media speculation. Sarah moved decisively toward the two children, her professional demeanor maintained despite her internal alarm. However, just as she approached George, he made a gesture that stopped everyone in their tracks. The young prince, in his earnest attempt to comfort Emma about family secrets, began to mimic something he had clearly seen at home, a protective stance that suggested he was shielding someone from unwanted attention or intrusion. The gesture was unmistakably one that suggested serious illness or vulnerability within the family. George's body language and his accompanying words about having to be very quiet and not letting anyone know how sick they are painted a picture that sent shockwaves through everyone present. The implications were staggering. If a senior member of the royal family was seriously ill and this information became public before an official announcement, it could cause constitutional crisis and national concern. Marcus Thompson made an instant decision that would later be analyzed and debated by royal protection specialists for years to come. Recognizing that the situation had moved beyond standard crisis management protocols, he moved swiftly toward the group, his training overriding all other considerations, including social niceties and proper royal protocol. As Sarah reached for George's arm, intending to guide him gently away from the conversation, the young prince suddenly became agitated in a way that none of the adults had anticipated. His gesture, which had seemed like playful mimicry, intensified into what appeared to be a distressing flashback or emotional response to something traumatic he had witnessed at home. George's behavior shifted dramatically from the articulate, composed child who had been sharing experiences with Emma to someone who appeared to be reliving a moment of genuine fear or distress. He began speaking rapidly about protecting her and not letting them hurt her anymore, his words tumbling over each other in a way that suggested he was no longer fully present in the garden party setting. The adults surrounding the conversation realized with growing horror that they weren't just witnessing revelations about royal family privacy, but were seeing a child experiencing what appeared to be genuine psychological distress related to something he had witnessed or experienced at home. The therapeutic nature of his conversation with Emma had apparently triggered memories or emotions that he had been suppressing. Dr. Walsh, drawing on her professional training in child psychology, immediately recognized the signs of a child processing trauma. However, her clinical assessment was complicated by the extraordinary circumstances and the potential implications of whatever had caused George's distress. The need to provide appropriate support for the child conflicted with the obvious necessity of protecting sensitive information about the royal family. It was at this critical moment that Sarah Mitchell made the decision that would define the entire crisis. As George's distress escalated and he began making gestures and statements that clearly referenced something deeply troubling he had witnessed, Sarah stepped forward with an authority that surprised even herself. Her voice, when she spoke, carried a commanding tone that cut through all the confusion and uncertainty of the situation. Looking directly at Marcus Thompson, she said with unmistakable clarity and urgency, "Step away from him!" The force of her command was so unexpected and so clearly protective that it immediately changed the entire dynamic of the situation. The Royal Protection Officer, trained to respond to threats and emergency situations, found himself being ordered back by a woman whose entire career had been dedicated to serving and protecting the royal family. Sarah's intervention was not just about managing a public relations crisis, but about protecting a child who appeared to be experiencing genuine psychological distress in a very public setting. Marcus hesitated, his training in conflict with the obvious authority and protective instinct being displayed by someone he had worked alongside for years. Sarah's command had been delivered with such conviction and protective intensity that it was clear she was responding to something beyond standard crisis management protocols. George's distress continued to escalate as the adults around him struggled to understand how to respond appropriately. His references to keeping the secret and not letting anyone hurt her were becoming more agitated, and it was becoming clear to everyone present that the young prince was dealing with something far more serious than typical family tensions. Prince William, finally close enough to fully understand what was happening with his son, experienced the complex realization that George had been carrying knowledge and emotional burdens that the family had failed to recognize or address. The protective father in him clashed with his role as a future king as he struggled to prioritize his child's immediate well-being while managing the broader implications of what was unfolding. Catherine arrived at the scene just as Sarah's command to Marcus created a moment of frozen tension among all the adults present. Her maternal instincts immediately focused on George's obvious distress, but her understanding of royal protocol and privacy concerns created an internal conflict about how to respond most appropriately. The charity event guests, mental health professionals, and other observers found themselves witnessing something unprecedented in royal history, a moment where the careful balance between public duty and private family needs was being tested in the most dramatic way possible. The young prince's distress was clearly genuine, but the implications of providing appropriate support in such a public setting were staggering. Walsh, recognizing that both children needed immediate attention and protection from the increasingly intense adult drama surrounding them, made her own professional decision to prioritize child welfare over all other considerations. Moving toward both George and Emma, she began implementing crisis intervention techniques designed to help children process traumatic experiences while in safe, supportive environments. As the situation reached its ultimate crisis point, with a clearly distressed royal child at the center of a complex web of family secrets, institutional protection needs, and public exposure, Sarah Mitchell's fierce protection of Prince George became the defining moment that would reshape how the royal family understood the intersection between their private struggles and their public responsibilities. The afternoon that had begun as a routine charitable event had revealed the human cost of maintaining royal dignity in the face of private family crises, and the lengths to which those dedicated to protecting the royal family would go to shield them from consequences they were too young to understand or manage.